I'm spoiling the third movie, y'all. Don't watch this if you haven't seen it yet. Come on now.
Looks like you're all out of balls!
I didn't even find this character annoying or super unlikable. He just didn't do anything. They try to give him some background as a former employee, or at least someone who worked with Robotnik, but it's all just talk. He barely appears prior to the final showdown, so that fight doesn't mean a lot. And then 90% of that fight is just Wade throwing bowling balls at him. What a nothing character. They literally had to throw a name on a poster for him because they forgot to name drop him once in the actual show. Just keeping it to the two agents or fucking Pistol Pete would have been fine. I don't think there's a more pointless character in this entire franchise.
Maybe I wouldn't insult you if you weren't such a freaking loser.
It's just a bratty little girl. It's not impossible for a mean little girl to be funny. It's been done, but sometimes people just assume a kid acting like a little shit alone is going to get a laugh. And it really doesn't. I feel mean ranking a kid this low, but it's not like it's the actor's fault or anything. They got lazy with this one.
Some of her paintings looked like vaginas.
I like Kristen Ritter. I have to respect a Breaking Bad cast member making their way into the Sonic franchise. The connection goes both ways now, but it really feels like they were setting her up as the secondary antagonist, but the movie forgets she exists really quickly, which might not even be a bad thing. She didn't make much of an impression on me, so more time spent on her might have just brought the whole movie down. But she comes off as a mainly pointless character. I guess a few of her actions keep the film moving forward, and there's at least a pretty entertaining scene with her in it, so she's not as pointless as the buyer, but she doesn't add a lot. Maybe they could have used her as a way to adapt Adventure 2 in the sense that Sonic becomes a fugitive, since she clearly does not like the cartoon characters. And it feels like they're almost going that route, but it gets dropped really fast. Remember when people thought she was gonna voice Rouge? Yeah, not a great character.
Have you tried their never-ending pasta bowl?
I didn't think the Olive Garden bit was funny. I know some people did. Like, I get where some people are coming from with that. If they have to throw in a sponsor, maybe it's kind of funny to make it as obvious as possible. But no, I still see it as them trying to sell me something. It didn't work for me. Now, with that in mind, I do find it very weird that they tried to give him a more serious storyline in the third movie, but I was open to it. Still, I don't think they really utilized him that well. They gave him a death scene where it feels like the movie expects me to be sad, but no, I didn't really care about this guy. Did anyone? Bringing Rockwell back up, it felt like his death was supposed to be another motive for her character, not like in Sonic, but one, that doesn't really make any sense. I don't know why she thinks he did it. And two, her final scene just has her believing Walters is still alive and not showing up again. So yeah, I'd say he ends up feeling pretty pointless too. With how little we know about this guy, I think having him be the one who was directly responsible for Maria's death would have made a bigger impact. But instead, they made him the one who tried to prevent it. But again, I don't really care about this guy, and the films never treated him like he was an important character outside of bringing Gunn into the film series, so him not wanting Maria to die doesn't really change how I feel about him at all. If the first two films were more focused on him, or even this one was more focused on him, maybe they could have made him more sympathetic, but it's all just way too rushed. And I'm not even saying I want the films to focus more on him. I just think that the third movie's kind of expecting things of its audience that it's not earning. The first two movies don't even really paint him in that positive of a light, so if they just went all out with making him a scumbag in this movie, maybe even a remorseful scumbag, I think it would have had a way stronger impact. But the films just feel kind of lost with him. Also, it would have made Shadow's attack on Tom disguised as him work a little better. Like, oh shit, Tom took the attack from Shadow that was supposed to be the attack on Maria's killer. It's not really a huge problem, but it does put him pretty low on my list despite appearing in all three movies.
Mom, I'm just asking him what he did on that day.
There's a point in time where Wanda would have been last place. I do like her actress, she's pretty funny in Righteous Gemstones, but I find her exceptionally irritating in the show, but nah, last place is a little harsh. On a rewatch, she isn't that bad. She isn't good, but I got a laugh or two out of her. I think I would have even liked her a little more if her only episode was the dinner episode, but no, they just had to bring her into the second half of the show. Not the worst, but certainly not a very fun human character to be around.
Is that what you think? That I'm nothing? That I'm no one?
One half of the villain duo from the Knuckles show. At this point, we are past the humans that I actively dislike, but she doesn't do a lot for me. She's a lot of big talk, but outside of capturing Knuckles in the first episode, she doesn't really succeed that much. At least Kid Cudi's character was funny. Still, I can stomach her. I don't think there's anything actively horrible about her character, she's just not a very good antagonist. The villains were definitely the weakest aspect of the Knuckles show.
Man, I should rip you limb from that.
I don't really have a ton to say about this guy. The infamous wedding scene from Sonic 2 is a little funny to me with how sidetracked it gets, but I'm not about to sit here and tell you that that scene was actually good or anything like that. It's kind of funny in a weird, surreal kind of way where I don't understand what they were even thinking doing this. Any laughs that I got from the scene, however, did not come from this dude. His scene in the third movie didn't really do anything for me either, and even then, that wasn't technically him.
What? shit.
I had to think a little bit about who counted for this list, since there are a lot of human characters with speaking roles that feel more like extras than an actual character. But this guy fucking tattooed himself onto his chest, that makes him stand out enough for this ranking. Like, I'm not going to include fucking Preston standing in the corner for a few seconds. I'm not proud that I know who that is, by the way. But this guy has a scene where he's the center of attention, and it's a pretty funny scene.
So you won't hurt your feet anymore.
It's Rachel's daughter, the little girl who gives Sonic his shoes. It's a nice little scene, I like it. Not putting her up higher because, you know, it's just like a single scene, but yeah.
Well, of course I missed you, son.
Pistol Pete to me is kind of an ironically funny character. He has a stupid outfit, a stupid name, there's a teacup in his bowling ball, his existence leads to lines like this.
He's not a schmuck. He's my dad.
I can't say that he's a genuinely great character or anything, but he is part of Shape and Wade's character arc in the Knuckles show, which honestly I did enjoy my time with for the most part. And whether it's for the reasons I'm supposed to or not, he does get a laugh out of me. Still, I kind of think these human characters aren't very good. I don't think that's a controversial take at all. Like, he's good in comparison to other human characters in this franchise. He's not a great character or anything. Very few of these characters are. I don't think Crazy Carl comes back after the first movie, which is kind of surprising considering some of the characters that do come back in the movie sequels. But I think him coming back would have especially made sense now that everyone knows he was right. I feel like they probably could have done some sort of follow-up scene in the second movie. Still, he draws Sonic, and that made me laugh, so he's already better than half of the human characters in the series.
What the heck is going on? Is that thing alien?
Maddie is fine. She is completely serviceable as another parent to Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. There's a fun scene between her and Knuckles in the first episode of the Knuckles show. She's likable enough. I like her interactions with Puppet Tom. I don't think anybody's going to these movies for Maddie, but I don't think anyone ever minds seeing Maddie either. Her and Randall hijacked the second movie for a while, but to give her some credit, I remember when I saw this in theaters, she was genuinely getting a lot of laughs from the audience. More so than any character, honestly. I don't think Sonic fans think that highly of her, but general audiences going to see this with their kids probably got something out of her. And yeah, in terms of the kind of bland humans in this film series, she is one with a very strong personality, who can be fun to watch. Any sincere laugh I got out of that wedding scene did come from her. I do think giving her a smaller role in the third movie was a good call though.
Do I look like I need your power?
Yeah, I think he's a decent bit funnier than his partner in crime. His character isn't meant to be taken seriously at all, so he can purely be a comic relief villain. I think his line delivery was good, and him and Wade going up against each other in the second episode of the Knuckles show was a scene that I actually enjoyed. Also, I like Kid Cudi's credits song for movie 2. That does not put this character any higher on the list, but like, I don't like the first movie's credits song, and I don't like the third movie's credits song. The second one was the only one that had a song that I like, so props to Kid Cudi.
What did I do to deserve this?
Wade's mom has a couple of nice scenes that escalate her this far up for me. The talk she has with Knuckles is charming, and the scene with her talking to Wade about his father after the two start reconnecting was a very well performed scene in my opinion. It felt very sincere, and they were able to get through it without throwing in an awkward line or trying to force humor into it. I like that they were willing to just let the two have a real conversation for a second. I guess that isn't really a glowing review for a character that's made it this high up on the list, but at the end of the day we are talking about a film franchise that isn't going that deep with any of its characters, with the exception of some of the characters added in the third movie, of course. I mean, look, I enjoy it, but we are watching something that has children in mind, so when it's able to pull something like this off, I'll appreciate it while it lasts. I think Tom is a likable enough protagonist to have in the series. It's kind of funny watching him go from main character to side character, like he was arguably just as important as Sonic in the first movie, but I am glad that the two sequels didn't write him out entirely. I think that would have been very weird. The second movie has a few nice moments between him and Sonic, and I think the third movie utilized him very well. Honestly, he was probably at his best in that third movie. I'm glad the films are more focused on the Sonic characters unlike the first movie, but I'm also glad the movie gave him a more natural way to be involved in the film's story, unlike the second movie. Like most of the human characters, I'm not going to see these movies for Tom, but while I'm sticking around, Tom is not a bad character to spend some time with. Puppet Tom might have him beat though.
And now we begin our quest.
I feel like if any of these are going to get pushback, it's gonna be this one. Like, come on, how do I like Jack Sinclair more than the main human in the Sonic movies? Well, main human protagonist in the Sonic movies. If it weren't for the rock opera episode, he wouldn't be here. Like, we would have probably talked about him a while ago if it wasn't for that episode. But that episode is genuinely a great time and the most worthwhile thing in the Knuckles show, in my opinion at least. And he is a major part of it. I didn't think that highly of him in the first episode, episode, but the 4th episode elevated him so high with just how much fun that musical number was, and honestly how fun the climax of that episode was. He is without a doubt the best antagonist of the Knuckles series because his conflict with Wade is well established at the start of the show and has a satisfying payoff that allows Wade to grow as a character, and we get to have a lot of fun in the process of all of that happening. So yeah, I think Jack Sinclair is a good character. Not amazing, but good. With that being said, I do think the top 5 human characters are all really solid. I like these 5 a lot. Maria is an interesting case because I actually think she's handled better in the 3rd movie than she is in the games. Not to say she isn't good in the games, there's a reason I and many other people were excited for this adaptation, but the games feel like they took the approach of making Maria seem like this saint, and it's supposed to reflect how Shadow felt about her in these small glimpses of their time together. So I think it works fine, but this movie takes a different approach where they're trying to make her feel more like an actual child. I think both are effective at displaying the grief Shadow is facing, but the movie does a better job of making her feel like a character I actually care about, and therefore I care more about their bond. I'm not going to act like this movie is the first time we've ever seen this. I've never read any of the issues of the Archie comic that went into Maria's story, and I don't remember the Sonic X adaptation that well, so it is at least the first time I've seen it play out like this. The two had a pretty good dynamic, and then there's some funny bits like with the Bio-Lizard in the movie they're watching together, and Shadow very ironically comparing himself to the Bio-Lizard when talking to Maria later. Like, that's kind of clever. Maria was quite the character to take on because I could see them really wanting to keep these movies more lighthearted and not properly show what happened in the games. And they do cop out a little bit. They don't show her get shot. I don't have a problem with that, by the way. But I still think they managed to find a way to show it in a PG way that had the same impact. Alright, I don't know how much of a hot take this one is. The Knuckles show disappointed a lot of Sonic fans, but seemed to do well with general audiences, and the reaction to Wade seems to vary from people despising him to people thinking he's one of the best human characters in the entire franchise. I think he's one of the best human characters in the entire franchise. I was very tempted to give him first place on this list, and I really mean that. And look, I get it, they called it Knuckles, and Knuckles doesn't really appear in the second half of the show that much. I understand not being happy about that, but to me that doesn't make Wade a bad character, but instead the exact opposite. I enjoyed the Knuckles show in spite of the lack of Knuckles, because I liked Wade so much. I found him very likable in this show. I found his incompetence very endearing because it was always coming from a place of giving it his all. He's always trying to do what he thinks is right, but he's just really bad at everything. But that just made the moments where he did finally get something right all the more satisfying. I was really rooting for Wade after a while. I remember seeing the teasers for the show and thinking, why Wade? That comic relief cop from the first 2 movies, he didn't do much in those. I don't want to watch a whole show of this guy. But I liked him so much in the show that I actually rewatched the first 2 movies to see his character again, and honestly the show made me appreciate him even more. I started to see Wade as a funnier character than I did before. I think I initially dismissed him because truthfully he's not important story-wise, but he's got the same amount of energy to him that the better human characters of the series have. The scene in the 2nd episode where he's planning his rescue mission was probably my 2nd favorite scene in the entire show. And yes, Knuckles is barely in it. My favorite scenes in the show don't even have Knuckles in it. Like, at his peak, Wade is fun to watch. I think his role in the 3rd movie was very smart. I like Wade, but a quick little scene was really all we needed from him. And it kinda ties back to the Knuckles show without making it necessary to watch, which I think that's a good thing. Why should the Knuckles show have introduced characters like Rouge or the Chaotix? That would have made the show an obligation to the people trying to follow everything going on in the movies. We've seen why doing that isn't a great idea. If you didn't watch the Knuckles show, Wade being the one in charge of protecting the Master Emerald is just a funny little bit. Knuckles said he left it with a very fierce warrior, and then it's the most pathetic character in the film series. But if you did watch the Knuckles show, Knuckles trusted Wade with the Emerald because of everything the two went through together. It works both ways, and I can appreciate that. Wade rules. I'm not gonna pretend that he doesn't.
In the saggy flesh.
I genuinely did not think Gerald was gonna work when I saw what they were doing in the trailer. I wasn't gonna let it bother me that much because it became very clear to me that these films were never gonna do exactly what I wanted them to. They have so many more priorities other than just making fans of the games happy, and I understand that. But this really goofy version of Gerald, who 1 is still alive and 2 is also being played by Jim Carrey, yeah, I'm not feeling that. But not only did it deliver on what I want out of a film adaptation of Gerald in the end, but he was funny. Like, honest to God, Jim Carrey's energy in this third movie really did it for me. He came such a long way in this film series. I did not care for him in the first one. It's not because he did a bad job, it's just because they weren't really adapting the character I like. I really don't think that guy in the first movie is Robotnik. The second one, he's starting to show more. Third one, it's this film universe version of him, but yeah, I see it now. It does feel like a proper adaptation, and Gerald just added so much to it. But what really won me over with him is when it came to tell the more serious and tragic story of Gerald, they weren't afraid to do that. They didn't have to force a joke in there. When he basically admits to Robotnik that he doesn't really care about him, he's no Maria, and he's trying to explain to him why he should just accept his fate because of how big of a loser he is. That was genuinely sad. That genuinely made me feel bad for poor old Ivo, and that's not something I was expecting it to successfully do. His story in Adventure 2 is really dark, and while I do think having all the Jim Carrey shenanigans really tones it down, you are still watching a murder-suicide take place from a man grieving his granddaughter from many years ago. So I think it's pretty damn effective still. Also, those flashback scenes worked really well. There are some really unsettling and depressing shots of Gerald. I think they really made it work. They did their own thing with it. I still prefer what the games did, but in terms of giving Jim Carrey a good send-off, assuming he doesn't come back, which I think it's possible he'll come back, but who knows? This was a fun way to go out with him. Alright, I'm going to talk about number 1 and 2 at the same time, just because I genuinely struggled ranking the two of them. But honestly, is anyone surprised that it came down to these two? We're talking about Agent Stone and Dr. Robotnik. Now, which one is which? Which one's number 2 and which one's number 1? I actually struggled with this for a while, because for a long time, I thought it was Dr. Robotnik was number 1 and Agent Stone was number 2, and I felt that way throughout a majority of writing this video. Like, when I made the list, Robotnik was number 1 before I wrote anyone else down. It was just, of course he's number 1. But the more I thought about it, the more I started leaning towards Agent Stone, and my reasoning for that is, I like Agent Stone in all 3 movies. He's an original character that has grown so much on the fans that he is embraced as a Sonic character more than any original character the film series has brought in. There are so many people who want him to take over as main antagonist with Jim Carrey not coming back. Again, that's an assumption. But yeah, if Jim Carrey doesn't come back, I would love to see Agent Stone take on a bigger role. But I think ultimately what makes Agent Stone surpass Dr. Robotnik for me is that it took a while for Dr. Robotnik to grow on me. I wasn't really that into the Jim Carrey shenanigans in the first movie, even though I can appreciate it a bit. I think it's something that certainly helped the film series get attention. I think it's something that certainly helped these sequels get made, and I do think he eventually really grew into the role and the character that I wanted to see. I enjoyed him a lot in the second movie, and by the third movie, yeah, that's exactly what I want. He even has the outfit, that was wonderful. But Agent Stone, I just liked him in all 3 of them. He was a fun character in the first one. He was an even more fun character in the second one. And the third one, they actually go into his character a bit. They go into what him and Robotnik mean to each other a decent bit, and they're pretty open about it by the end of it. Like, these are 2 people who love each other. And I'm glad that the third movie was willing to go that far with that. I'm glad that they saw that audiences and fans were taking a liking to this guy. And I think Agent Stone probably has that more than any character. Because I think a lot of the non-Sonic fans are going for the Jim Carrey shenanigans or for what funny stuff Rachel is gonna say. You know, the people who really don't care about this franchise, and they just want something that's gonna keep them entertained while their kids are watching the Sonic characters. And then all the Sonic fans don't really like these human characters I just listed. Like, Robotnik and Maria are fine, but they don't give a shit about Wade, they don't give a shit about Tom. But Agent Stone is just this character that it feels like both sides have embraced. The general audience and the fans really like this guy, and I can completely see why. He's a henchman for the main villain, but he's also just kind of likable. Like, it's kind of fascinating that he is on this guy's side, because nothing about him seems evil. There's a scene in the third movie where him and Shadow are watching a soap opera, and there's this love triangle going on, and Shadow's like, oh, she should just kill both of them. And Agent Stone kind of gives him a hard time about talking about death all the time. Like, isn't that kind of funny that he's saying that despite working with someone who has no problem with killing other people? And then there's that scene where he's just having a heart-to-heart conversation with Tails. That was a lot of fun. When he wasn't under Robotnik's direction, he worked in a coffee shop. Agent Stone, by all means, is not a villain, but his care for this specific guy makes him a villain. He loves this man so much that he's willing to become the bad guy. And I think that's a lot of fun. I think that's funny, I think it's weirdly heartwarming, and I think it makes him a pretty interesting character himself. I do hope that even if Jim Carrey doesn't come back, Agent Stone stays in the films. I hope if they make that Shadow show that's been teased, they make Agent Stone the human Shadow interacts with if they have to do that again. I'm assuming they're going to. I don't know how most people looked at the Knuckles show and didn't realize the reason Knuckles isn't in a lot of it is because that CG's expensive. If they make another one, they're gonna do the same thing. But yeah, number 2, Dr. Robotnik, and number 1, Agent Stone. I'm gonna give it to him. In a world where they perfectly adapt Robotnik in the first movie and they just perfectly carry it out through all 3, I think Robotnik would pass Agent Stone, but just looking at these movies for what they are and what they did and how they grew, I think Agent Stone is one of the few things in this film series that stayed consistently entertaining for me start to finish. And I gotta give the guy a lot of props for that. Agent Stone, by far the best human this film series introduced.